Today we're going to be learning Beitzah Daf Tetvav. It's the daf for Erev Yom Kippur. The daf for Yom Kippur will be up shortly after this one. We're going to just pull up my dedications in a second. Okay. Today's daf is sponsored by Odie and Judy in honor of the birth of a baby girl to Alana Perlin, her husband, Stephen, and her children, Shiur and Avi. Tizku legadla leTorah lechupa u'lemaasim tovim. And Alana continued Hatzlacha learning the Daf Yomi, so proud that you've been able to keep it up till now. And by Edem Privas, in honor of his wife, Adele Druk, and her mother, Susan Fishman. Okay, we're going to get started today. We're on the topic of what people can send to other people on Yantif. Right now, it seems to be, the way we understood the Mishnah, was you can send a gift on Yom Tov if it has something to do with the holiday, right? If it's connected with the holiday, you can use it on the holiday, not if it's something that you can't use on the holiday at all. Today, we'll see that eventually the Gemara is going to understand it a little bit differently and include some more things. But right now, that's what the Mishnah seems to say. So we were dealing with the first thing, which is clothes. Clothes, we said they have to be, whether they're sewn or not sewn, even though they're not finished, you can use them for all sorts of things. But then the questionable thing was clothes that are made of shatnez, which you can't, or cloth, it doesn't necessarily have to be clothing, but anything made of shatnez, what are you going to be able to do with that, right? It's got wool and linen mixed together, can't be worn, can't be used as a blanket. We said can't be used to sit on because, right, the Princess of the Peace story, even if it's 10 mattresses below, still a problem. And then we said, what about a vilon? What about a curtain? And then we said that doesn't work either because also, theoretically, the shamash might come along and use it to cover himself and warm himself up. They're going to equate here the issue of clothing with something that keeps you warm. Okay, we're going to see that very soon. If it doesn't keep you warm, then it's not really called clothing, according to them. So, ela b'kashim. So now they say it must be a very hard material that's made of wool and linen. Rashi says, b'gadim kashim she'ein michamimim. You can't warm, they can't be used to warm you because they're so hard. We never use it to warm yourself up. In which case they say, Rashi says, and therefore mutar l'shev alehem. And it's obviously you're not wearing them as clothes. They're too hard to wear as clothes, but you can sit on them. And since you can sit on them, that already means that if you can sit on them, then it has a purpose on Yom Tov, right? It has to be something that has a purpose on Yom Tov. Okay, so now we're going to say, Hi, namta gamda dinara sharia. Okay, just like Rav Huna B'rei Rav Yeshua says, this hard felt that they used in Narish, that's permitted because that's right. They're describing something of their time that people would know is not a problem of shatnez. Amarav Papa, Ardilin ein behen mishum kilayim. These are a type of socks. It's actually kind of funny the way Rashi describes socks. You sometimes see these funny sources where they describe things that we use. There's a funny source in Bava Metzia where the Rabbeinu Hananel describes a fork in words, right? You would never do that. It's something people use instead of using their hands to pick up the food. They use, this kind of thing. So here Rashi says, Ra'iti b'tshuvat ha'geonim, I saw in the tshuvat of the Gaonim, sheregilim lelovshan tachat min alehem. They often wear these under their shoes, right? Which we would just say, okay, that's socks, right? So it's a type of sock, but maybe it could be Rashi knew what socks were, but what he's describing here is a kind of strange kind of sock, because most socks you would say are clothing and there are things that warm you up. So it could be he's also just describing it in this way to say this is some strange kind of a thing that they wear under their shoes that sort of functioned as socks, but wasn't really like clothing. So ein behem mishum kilayim. Amarava hanitzrari depshite ein behem mishum kilayim. Tibizrani yesh mishum kilayim. These are two types of little bags they would use like a satchel. One is for money, coins. That one is hard and therefore it's not a problem. But bizrane, it's ones they use for seeds, that was very soft and that would be a problem of kilayim. Rav Ashi Amar, which is probably what you were thinking. What you're talking about, a little sack. Nobody warms themselves with a sack it's used for other things. So neither of them really has kilayim because it's not anything that you put on you and you would use for warming. So that was all our discussion about the clothing, the shatnez. What kind of shatnez could you be sending to a friend on Yantif? Avalos sandal hamisumal. But you can't send a sandalim misumar spiked shoes. Okay, there's shoes that had spikes coming out of them. What's the issue with sandalim misumar? Okay, first of all, it seems if you look at Shuli's article in Flashback, it seems this was something that was commonly worn by Romans. Sandalim misumar my time alo. What's the reason not? Mishum maaseh shahaya. Period. Because of something that happened. Now you might remember that we learned this in Masechet Shabbat on Daf Samach. We learned about this action, this maaseh that happened when the Romans. This is why I said it has to do with the Bar Kokhba revolt. During the Bar Kokhba revolt, the Jews went to hide in caves. And they were hiding in this cave, and they made a rule, no one's allowed out of the cave, because if anybody goes out of the cave, it will endanger everybody in the cave. So therefore, what they say? They said, you can only come in, nobody goes out. But one day, a guy coming into the cave was wearing his sandals backwards. And because his sandals were backwards, when you walk in, it makes a footprint outside the cave. And the people in the cave who were on the watch duty looked out and saw footprints going out because he walked going in, but wearing his shoes reversed. And they thought that somebody left, and they went crazy, and they all trampled each other. Like they all got nervous and they trampled each other. They were wearing, it could be they were wearing spiked sandals, and they trampled each other with their spiked sandals. And because of that, and they died. And it says, more people died there than the enemy was trying to kill them, right? It was ironic. Here they were trying to protect themselves, and they got so crazy about it that they ended up killing each other. Terrible tragedy. And in order to remember this Maaseh Shahaya, they instituted no spiked sandals on Shabbos or Yom Tov. Now, there's a few details missing from the story. Did the story happen on Shabbat? And that's why they remembered it by Shabbat, by saying no on Shabbat and Yom Tov. Some people say that Shuli actually suggests in her article that people didn't have enough money, and because they didn't have enough money to afford more than one pair of shoes, and the rabbis didn't want to say you can't ever wear these because it would seem strange, but they said, you can't wear them on Shabbat and Yom Tov, and that would basically minimize people buying these, and because if you would only have one pair of shoes anyway, and maybe that's it. Anyway, it could be just a way of reminding us of this event. I was thinking about the tragedy in Meron, and this idea of when we have a tragedy, you want to remember it somehow so that, right, first of all, so that you learn for next time not to do the same mistakes. So it could be that, there was this way of, and maybe they weren't wearing spiked sandals and the Romans were wearing the spiked sandals. And maybe it's a way to remember the Romans and what they did to us, that they caused us to kill ourselves. And again, what we have to learn from this action, not to get so panicked, not to get so crazy, right? That anyway, it's a way of remembering. So for whatever reason, the remembering is for, so that, we prevent these actions from happening again. He says you can't wear it, but you actually can carry it. You can't wear it on Yom Tov because of this action that happened. But it's not muktzah, mutar l'taltalon, midikatani em shalchim. It says you can't send it as a gift. If it meant it's muktzah, the isal kadata chasor l'taltalo, that it's got no, right. And it's what's the logic? If you can't wear it, well, then it's probably muktzah because you can't use it. But the point is, no, it's a gzerah of the rabbis that you can't wear it. We don't turn that into muktzah. And how do you know that from our sugya? Because if it was asur l'taltalo, hashal l'taltule asur mishalchim abai, if it's muktzah, then why should you even be, they wouldn't be talking about you can't send it to a friend. It would be obvious you can't send to a friend something that's muktzah. So therefore, the fact that they have to tell you can't send this to a friend means it's not muktzah. Now we're going through the list, not a shoe that's not sewn. So the Gemara says, pshita, if it's not sewn, obviously we can't use it. What use would that be, an unsewn shoe? So they say, okay, what if you put like little stitches, loose stitches in it, or some sort of thing that, safety pins that sticks it together? Maybe that's finished enough. And the bottom line is, no, it's not. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, af lomin al lavan, not a white shoe. Tanya, Rabbi Yehuda matir b'shachor v'oser b'lavan, mipnei shetzarich beitzat hagil. Rabbi Yehuda permits you to send a black one, but not a white one. Why? Because it's missing this chalky substance that they would put on to turn the shoe into black. Right? As I said yesterday, nobody apparently wore white sandals, right? Which is now a more common thing. They didn't wear them. Everything was always black. So it's unfinished. Rabbi Yossi oser b'shachor. This is weird. He forbids black shoes. It's going to be apparently new black shoes. If they've just blackened them, that's not enough. Because it's still missing another stage in the process. Hasn't been polished. They polish it or shine it before. Below pligi. But actually, there's no debate between Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Yossi, even though it looks like there's a debate. Marki atre or marki atre. Each person discussed it within their own locale. In other words, the custom was different in each place. What was the difference in custom that affected them saying something different? Be'atre demal bisra letachat. Be'atre demal bisra le'el. There's two sides to the leather. The leather comes from an animal. There's the side that was connected to the flesh of the animal, and then there was the top side of the animal. Top side of the animal is smooth, right? The skin. But underneath, the part that was next to the flesh of the animal is hard and needs polishing. So if you live in a place, okay, we're going to go through now. Rabbi Yehuda lived in a place where the part that was close to the flesh, the basar, was face down on the shoe. So face up, you had this nice finished look without even polishing. And that's why he said black is okay. Rabbi Yossi said black is not okay because where he lived, they did the shoe the opposite way. They had the flesh side up. And because of that, it needed polishing. Nobody would wear it until you polished it. Zakla. So now we get to the general rule. Kol sheno timbo b'yom tov, right? If you can benefit from it on Yom Tov, then it's fine. So now the Gemara says, Rav Shesha chara l'Rabbanan l'shadurei tefillin b'yom tov. Rav Shesha permitted the rabbis to send tefillin on Yom Tov. So now we say, what's the story with tefillin on Yom Tov? Why are you allowed to do that? We don't wear tefillin on Yom Tov. Amar le'Abaye v'ha'anan t'nan, but don't we say in the Mishnah, Kol sheno timbo b'yom tov mishachinotav. So he says, against Rav Sheshet, how could you allow this? This doesn't have anything to do with Yom Tov. The Mishnah said it explicitly. So the answer, hachi kamar. No, actually reread the Mishnah. It's not what you thought originally. Kol sheno timbo b'chol mishachin oto b'yom tov. Anything that you benefit from on chol, you can send to someone on Yom Tov. Yeah, this is a whole different thing. This means you can send people gifts on Yom Tov, even if it has nothing to do with Yom Tov, you're not going to use it on Yom Tov. Why? Well, if you get a gift like tefillin, which is a great gift, if you wear tefillin, then you say, wow, that's a beautiful gift. It makes me happy on Yom Tov. So that has to do with Yom Tov. But if you send someone that they can't benefit from at all, right? Now you have to explain. What about all these cases? We just said you can't send unfinished shoes because they can't use them on Yom Tov. But wouldn't you be happy to get unfinished shoes? Well, maybe not necessarily, because the kind of gifts you're allowed to give on Yom Tov are gifts that are ready for use. Okay, I'm thinking like sometimes people get these fancy technology gifts that it takes them, 5 months till they figure out how to use it. So, that maybe is a gift. Well, first of all, that would be a separate problem because it's muktzah. You can't give a muktzah gift. So forget that. But if you took that as an example, let's say it wasn't muktzah, to give someone a gift that they have to set up and they have to, right? It's unfinished, right? Sometimes you get a gift like that. You're like, this is great, but I'll never get to actually figuring out how to use this gift. So that's not a good gift to give on Yom Tov because you want someone to get immediate pleasure, right? I'm thinking about kids, you buy them gifts. And if you buy a kid a gift, right, they want an instant gratification gift. Like I remember once we bought someone, it was back in the day, like some CDs that they could use on their computer. But the kid looked at it like, what is this? It's a game on the computer, but this isn't going to benefit me right now. Like I want a game I can start racing my car around a track or something like that. So basically there's this idea that if you wanted to have to do with Yom Tov and to allow you to do this on Yom Tov, we're only going to allow it if there's some benefit to the person on Yom Tov, even if they can't use it on Yom Tov, but they'll be happy that you give them the gift. And that's why all those other cases are things that you can't use. The only one exception, which is a bit of a thing, and there's something in the Rambam, I think doesn't have that halacha, if I remember correctly, is the sandala misumal. Because the sandala misumal you can use on other days and not on Shabbat and Yom Tov only. So theoretically, according to now the Gemara, that would be a bit of a problem, like a bit of a question, it would raise an issue with this last theory. Okay, moving on. Amar Abai, here's the associated property of the Gemara. And here he says it explicitly. Tefillin ho'il va'atu liyada nema b'hu milta. Well, since we're on the topic of tefillin, I'm going to tell you something else about tefillin. Okay, what is it? And it's a Shabbos-related halacha, not a Yom Tov-related halacha, because it has to do with carrying. Haya baba derech utfilin berosho. Friday afternoon, you're walking around, you have tefillin on your head. Vishak alav hachaman. The sun starts to set. It's going to be Shabbos. What do? You're out in the fields. You're walking home. You're nowhere near your house. You can't just take off your tefillin and leave them there. They'll be unprotected. So meniach yado alehen. You kind of, block it with your hand. Again, if you're wearing tefillin shel yad, it's not so easy to do that. Maybe you stick it under your shirt and, hold the tefillin shel rosh. And you walk home like that. So you walk home that whole way so that people don't see you wearing tefillin on Shabbos. But, we're allowed to do it in this case. Just don't let everybody see. This is like, the opposite of Maradayim, right? We're not, or it's similar to Maradayim. We don't want people to think the wrong things. So, kind of cover it up so nobody sees. Likewise, if you're sitting in the Beit Midrash, you're wearing tefillin on your head, and again, the day got turned to nighttime, it was Shabbat. Apparently, the Beit Midrash wasn't a protected place either. You're allowed to now walk home with your tefillin. Mativ Rav Huna Berei de Rav Ika. But Rav Huna Berei de Rav Ika says to him, I don't understand. There's a Tanaitic source that seems to go against what you just said about it. The Tanaitic source says, the exact same case. Same thing. Right here it changes. Until you get to the house that's right next to the wall of the city. In other words, go into the city. The assumption I told you, we were out in the fields. Walk into the city. The first house you get to, put it there. And then same thing. You go to the closest house to the Beis Medrash. That's where you put your tefillin. Don't carry it all the way home. So Abaye, how can you go against this Tanaitic source? Lo kashes. That's not difficult. Hadamintra, hadalomintra. That it depends if the house next to the Beit Midrash or the house next to the wall of the city is protected. If it's not protected, then you can go all the way home. If it's protected, then you leave it there. To which the Gemara asks, wait, idilo mintra, if you're talking about a place that's unprotected entirely, well, then your whole case doesn't make sense. Why did you give us this example of someone who had tefillin on his head already, right? It seemed like if the tefillin's on your head, we allow you to bring it home. But if the area is an unprotected area, then we're even allowed even if it's on the ground, we're allowed to pick it up and take it home on Shabbat, as we remember from a Mishnah in Shabbat. Making all these references to Shabbat today. Dehatnan was a Mishnah in Masechet Shabbat that said, "Hamotzei tefillin machnisan zug zug." If you find tefillin on the street, you're allowed to bring them in zug zug. What do? You carry them by wearing them. You wear them, bring them home. You wear them and bring them home. Same thing here. You're wearing them. So the point is, you didn't need to give an example. If they're already on your head, you can walk home with them. You could have even said, if they're sitting on the ground, you could take them home. So if it's not protected, then you should be able to do this. So I see your question about what is protected, unprotected. We're going to see it right now. So the Gemara answers, Lo kashya. Don't worry about that Mishnah. That Mishnah was talking about a place that we'll see. Okay, so ha'deminter machmat ganve umachmat kalbe. We're going to have three levels of protected, unprotected, etc. If it's unprotected entirely, meaning animals can get to it, or people can get to it, meaning people can steal. If you have both those, neither, then you're allowed to pick it up and you can bring it, right, zug zug. That's the one about picking it up off the ground. The cases Abaye was talking about in the Beitzah that he tried to resolve, the Beitzah, how it worked in with what he said, are all places where they are at least somewhat protected. And then the issue is, what is it protected from? So they're going to say, when he says you can bring it all the way, right? If it's protected from ganavim and klavim, the first house you get to is already a very protected house, right? Maybe it's someone you know, and you know it's protected. No problem. Animals can't get there. People can't steal. Then you leave your tefillin right there. However, what Abaye came to say is, when he said you could go all the way home, that was if the places on the way are protected from, we're going to see right now, hadimintara machmat kalbe. They're protected from dogs and other animals from getting to them. But I'm thinking of once I went to someone's pool and I put my daughter's glasses down. She went into the pool and the dog came by and bit the glasses and ruined them, right? So we know that That could happen. That dogs could kind of, come and bite things and ruin things. So if it's protected from dogs, like there's a fence around it, let's say, but not a fence that a person couldn't jump. So then you're allowed to go all the way home. So that's a somewhat protected area. Now, why is Abai telling you this? Wouldn't you say it's obvious? And this is the clincher line. And it's nice that it ends the chapter with this clincher line. If it's obvious that it's not protected from thieves, well then, if it's not protected from thieves, then obviously you can't leave your tefillin there. Someone might steal them. So what's Abai telling us that we didn't know otherwise? So he says, well, Ma'u detema rov listim Yisrael nenu v'lo mezalzalei behu kamashmalan. What if you might think, well, most of the robbers in my area are Jewish robbers. Okay, this is just an interesting thing in and of itself, right? First of all, we're assuming the reason is not because Jews are terrible people, but because you probably live in a predominantly Jewish area, in which case we're going to say, right, we're going to assume the robbers are locals. If the robbers are locals, then they're mostly going to be Jews because you live in a Jewish area. Now, what's the difference if there's Jewish robbers? Well, if there's Jewish robbers, they won't be lo mezalzalei behu. Jews, at least, they might be a thief, but they understand the sanctity of tefillin. So they're not going to steal your tefillin or mistreat your tefillin. Okay? Therefore, you might have thought that that's the case. Kamash malan always means it's not. Now, it's always interesting when you have a kamash malan, it's not what? Either you can't assume that Rov Yisrael ganavim heim, right? Like in my neighborhood, most of the robbers don't come from within the neighborhood. They come from other neighborhoods, right? So could be, it's saying, don't assume most of the robbers are Jews. Or it could be, don't assume that a Jewish robber is going to take care of your tefillin, right? That there's not necessarily a connection between them. So it's very interesting end to the chapter. I see someone saying, why would anyone else steal tefillin? But the truth is people do, because tefillin are expensive. And it was clear, we learned this in other sugyot in Shabbat, that tefillin were very expensive in those days, and not everybody had tefillin. So for that reason, people steal tefillin and sell them for sure. I mean, there's even these stories about Sifrei Torah that ended up in Poland, like inside kids' toys and things like that, right? There's this whole story of they found a group was traveling in Poland and they found in the shuk, like things they had cloth of Sifrei Torah in them, and like they just might use them for other things. So, and that's mizalzalu behu, right, of the first order. That's, the concern that people will mistreat them, right? It's not necessarily even that you'll lose your tefillin. I think it's a concern that somebody will mistreat the tefillin, right? Either the dog will eat them or somebody might do something else with them. And with that, Hadron alach Beitzah. We finished the first chapter of Beitzah. Okay, not Masechet Beitzah yet. We still have some time. Okay, starting the new chapter. The new chapter is all about cooking it starts with cooking from Yantif to Shabbos, to which we make an Eruv Tavshilin, and we're going to talk about that right now. Yom Tov shechal liot Erev Shabbat lo yivashel b'tchila mi Yom Tov v'Shabbat. Yom Tov that falls out on Erev Shabbat, don't cook from Yom Tov to Shabbat. Aval mevashelhu liyom tov. You can cook for Yom Tov im hotir l'Shabbat. And if you happen to have leftovers, you can use your leftovers for Shabbat. That's not a problem. Bo'oset tavshil me'erev Yom Tov v'somech alav l'Shabbat. However, what can you do to resolve this problem? You can cook something before Yantif, and then you can rely on that you've already started your cooking for Shabbat, and that allows you to cook for Yantif. Because the Gemara is going to have some questions on this. Where do we get this from? Where do we see in the Torah a source for this? Where do we this? Why? How does it work? We'll get to that. But the first thing you really have to know is, what's the forbidden nature? When an Eruv comes to fix something, what's it coming to fix? Is it usher from the Torah to cook on Yantif to Shabbat? Or is it only the Rabbanit? So basically, it's clear from the commentary from the rabbis, we're going to see a machloket later, that it's not forbidden by Torah law. Okay, if it were forbidden by Torah law, an Eruv wouldn't really resolve that. Okay, you can't just say, oh, I cook something now on Erev Yantif, and that's going to allow me to cook from Yantif to Shabbat. That doesn't really make sense. So you'd have to say it's only rabbinic. The question is, why is it rabbinic? Because the Torah, all it permitted was food that you need to eat on that day. So how did they all of a sudden come and say, oh, well, if you cook for Shabbos, it's actually not forbidden by Torah law. So Rabbah says that the reason is because we have this concept, like we saw before with Rabbah, that he holds that if you cook, the whole thing is, can you cook from Yantif to a regular day? You can't. But he says you don't get lashes for it. Why? Because maybe guests will come if I cook today extra food. You never know who might show up in my house. So because of that, you could say the same thing for Shabbat. I'm cooking today really for Shabbat, but you never know. Guests might come. So therefore, it drops it down a level. It's still not permitted, but it drops it down from a Torah to a rabbinic. Rav Chisda says it's really because the sanctity of Shabbat is really like the sanctity of Yom Tov. And therefore, right, they're kind of viewed as one sanctity. It's almost like Kedusha Achat that we learned with, it's 2 days, is it 1 day? It's almost like one long day of sanctity, in which case we could cook from one to the other. So, right, I like your point, Art, about how guests might be suspended during COVID. Yes. So, which by the way, is important to point out because there's a practical difference, the halacha that the commentaries talk about, and yours would be one of them, which is, what if guests aren't coming because it's COVID and there's a closure and nobody's showing up in your house? Then it wouldn't be relevant, right? The question that the nafkamina they brought isn't the same one. It's a different one. That some people say that if you hold like Rabbah, then you would say that if it's, let's say, the end of Yantif, right? You're at the very end of the day and you just finished your meal and, nobody's showing up at this point. Maybe you're not allowed to cook at the very end of the day. So some people say that would be an issue really to cook at the end of the day. So keep that in mind when you cook on Yantif for Shabbat, maybe avoid, cooking toward the end of the day when it's clear, you're not worried about tons of guests showing up at that hour. Okay, so now we're going to have a machloket in the Mishnah between Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel about what your cooked dish, what your eruv needs to have in it. So Beit Shammai omrim shnei tavshilim. You have to have 2 different cooked items. Beit Hillel omrim tavshil echad. They say one is sufficient. V'shavim b'dag u'beitzah shavahen shehen shnei tavshilim. And they're like, but they both agree that now this is a strange line, I'll tell you why in a minute, but they both agree that if you have fish with egg on top, that's considered 2 different dishes. I was just looking through a cookbook that, and I was trying to get ideas, and I noticed that in a bunch of the recipes, they kind of throw this egg on top, like a poached egg, a sunny side up egg right at the top of the food. It's like all these dishes that's what this was, right? It's like fish with an egg, like a sunny side up egg on top of your fish. That's already considered 2 cooked dishes. Okay, even though it's really one dish, right? Like in the recipe book, it was one dish. It was called whatever it was, and it had in it egg and vegetables or something like that. But according to here, they say even Beit Shammai would agree, right? It's not really shavin. It just really means Beit Shammai would agree that would count as 2. Some commentaries ask, why are we talking about Beit Shammai here, right? We normally don't care about Beit Shammai's opinion so much, but anyway, this obviously is only relevant to Beit Shammai because according to Beit Hillel, it's obviously fine. You only need one dish. Achalo o she'avad. What if you ate your eruv or it got lost? Lo yivashel ala b'tchila. You can't start cooking for Shabbos on Yantif if you lost your eruv or you ate it. Generally, we keep the eruv till Shabbos, right? We have a custom in our family that we eat it at Sudash Lishit, okay, that you eat the end of Shabbat. V'im shiel mimenu kol shehu, somei chalav l'Shabbat. And if you leave over, though, a little bit, in other words, if it got lost, but you had a little bit of it, or you ate it, but you left over a little bit, tomorrow we'll see how much is a little bit, then somei chalav l'Shabbat, you can use it on Shabbat. And those meaning you can cook for Shabbat using this eruv. So the Gemara starts off, as I said, minahani mili. Where do we get this from in the Torah? Now, it's a little bit strange because this whole Isser is only d'Rabbanan, and the eruv is a takana d'Rabbanan. Why are we trying to find a reference in the Torah? Okay, the rabbis like to do that, even though really it doesn't appear in the Torah anywhere, obviously, and we wouldn't expect it to. And it's going to be interesting, Shmuel's proof, because you would think, I never really thought of this verse meaning this. Okay, so Amar Shmuel, Damar Kra, the Pasuk says, Zachoret Yom HaShabbat l'kadsho. Remember the Shabbat to sanctify it. Now, normally we use this Pasuk to teach us about Kiddush. Okay, teachers are supposed to say it in words. You're supposed to make Kiddush. What does that have to do with Eruv? Zachreu me'achar sheba lashkicho. Remember something that might possibly be forgotten. Now, how could you ever forget Shabbat? I mean, all week, we're always kind of, our eyes are toward Shabbat. Well, on a week that Yantif comes out on Erev Shabbat, you might get caught up in Yantif and forget about Shabbat. So because of that, remember it, meaning we're going to give you a solution to how to make sure not to forget Shabbat when Yantif comes right before Shabbat. My timer, and I'm thinking about the fact that this isn't Eruv related, but we just had Rosh Hashanah was 2 days, right? Then it was over, and then it was already almost Shabbat, right? And it was almost like, where did Shabbat come in and who prepared for that Shabbat, right? It was almost like, like you could see why someone might forget Shabbat, right? We couldn't remember what day it was. And is it already Shabbat? How did that happen? So here they say, right, that's why we have an Erev Tavshilin. That's where we get it from. So my time, now what's the reason? Now this is strange. First they ask what's the pasuk. Now they say what's the reason? It's sort of similar, but now they're going to say it's a different reason. Again, we're worried about Yom Tov overshadowing Shabbat, and we don't want it to end up that you don't have nice food on, right? You're going to end up, let's say you forgot, you didn't cook, so you're going to end up cooking for Yom Tov this nice meal, and on Shabbat, you're going to take tuna out of the can, and you're going to take a salad, and that's going to be your Shabbat. It's not going to be nice cooked food, right? Cooked food was their idea of Shabbat. Rav Ashi Amal, Kadesh Yomru, Ein Ofim Miyom Tov l'Shabbat, Kal V'chomer Miyom Tov l'Chol. The reason for the Eruv is actually what we call like a hekel, a symbol. It's to teach you that you can only cook from Yom Tov to Shabbat and not from Yom Tov to a regular day. They don't want you to think that if we allow cooking on Yom Tov for Shabbat, you might think we can cook from Yom Tov to a regular day as well. So we make an Erev Tavshilin so that it's clear we're only allowing this because it's Shabbat and we wouldn't allow it if it were a regular day. Tanan. Now they're going to quote this Mishnah and basically talk about Rava and Rav Ashi and which one makes sense with this Mishnah. This is our Mishnah. Right? So what did our Mishnah say? You cook it, you do your Erev on Erev Shabbat. So how does this work in with Rava and Rav Ashi? Bishlama le Rav Ashi de Amal Kadesh Yomru Enofim Yom Tov l'Shabbat Hainu de Me'erev Yom Tov Im Yom Tov Lo. If you want to make a point that you can't cook on Yom Tov for a chol, right? And we're only allowing this because you made an Eruv, then you have to do it from before Yom Tov. And it's basically saying, even Yom Tov to Shabbat, we can't cook. But since we started cooking now, it'll allow us to continue cooking as long as we started beheter, right? Where we were allowed to because it was Erev Yom Tov. Aval, but Ela l'Rava, my area Erev Yom Tov, afilu b'Yom Tov nami. If according to Rava, we just want to ensure that you have good food on Shabbat, then let's say you forgot to make your Eruv on Erev Yom Tov, or let's say you don't even forget. Why can't you just make an Eruv on Yom Tov? It's only so that on Yom Tov we make sure that we remember, let's make something nice for Shabbat. So you should be able to make an Eruv on Yom Tov as well. So the Gemara says, inachinami. Really, according to Rava, you could do your Eruv, make it on Shabbat. However, but the rabbis instituted no way because we're worried you might forget. If you forget, then you'll be stuck. Now, we don't want you to forget, so we make sure we tell you do it before Yom Tov, then you prepare before. Otherwise, you might just start cooking on Yom Tov for Shabbat and forget all about your Eruv. The Tana might tell me hacha. Now, we started with this source of Shmuel in the Torah, Zachor Yom Shabbat L'Kacho. Now we're going to say that a Tana brings it from a different source in the Torah, the man. Again, we always go back to this thing, the pasuk about the man. Et asher tofu efu, et asher tivashlu bashelu. What was cooked, right? What you want to bake, and what you want to cook, meaning do it all before. But it says it in a bit of a weird language. Tofu, afu, tivashlu bashelu, this double language each time. From here we learn that when you want to cook for Shabbat, you have to cook from something, right? If you want to cook on Erev Shabbat, let's say it's Yom Tov, so you can only cook for something that's already been cooked or already been baked, okay? Meaning you have to have done an Eruv before. Obviously, it doesn't mean you continue to cook that item. It just means that you've shown that I've already started and therefore you can continue. Right? This is where the rabbis came and brought a connection between Eruv and finding some sort of hint to it in the Torah. Now we get to a story, and this is going to get to a very famous machloket about Yom Tov in general, the nature of Yom Tov. Okay, it's good to learn this on Yom Kippur because this is all about when we have a sanctified day, what does it mean sanctified in terms of eating and drinking, in terms of being to God, right? Well, we're going into this day of Yom Kippur, which is what we're going to see. Chetzio lachem, kulo lachem, where we're going into a day that's clearly kulo lashem, right? We don't have the whole element of Simchat Yom Tov, of the food and all of that. So let's read our story and then we'll get into the machloket. Tanu Rabbanam, Masebe Rabbi Eliezer. We're talking about Rabbi Eliezer ben Horkonos, the famous, right, who we've talked about many times. He was of the Shammai tradition, right? He had that very zealous kind of attitude, and we're going to see it right here, right away. I just realized now there's a bit of a problem. It says all day long. We're going to see he does finish at a certain point, but here it sounds like he's darshaning all day long. Yatzta kat rishona amar halalu ba'alei ptasim. Okay, slowly while he starts to teach, people start leaving. Okay, this is, by the way, a good example. If you're teaching a class and people start walking out, maybe get a hint that, maybe you're speaking too long, right? Maybe you've lost people's attention. So this is what happens. He starts to teach and people start leaving. He's not so happy when people leave. It's a bit insulting. So what does he say? He says to the rest of the people in the room, halalu ba'alei ptasim. Oh, those people must have huge vats of wine in their house because it's Yantif, they have so much wine. They have to start early in drinking. And, obviously means feasting in general. That must be why they left the shiur early. Kachnia. Now the second group starts to leave. Amar halalu ba'alei chaviyot. These people obviously don't have as much as the first people, but they still have barrels of wine in their house. And that must be why they're leaving so early. Kach lishit, okay, the third group, right? You start to see what's going on here. He doesn't really get the hint. Amar halalu ba'alei kadim. These people must have only jugs of wine in their house because they didn't leave that early. They need less time to eat. That's why they left when they left. Kat revi'it, the fourth group leaves. Amar halalu ba'alei legigim. Okay, they must have bottles instead of jugs. Okay, something smaller. Kat chamishit, amar halalu ba'alei kosot. These people only have cups. They only have glasses to drink their wine with. They don't need that much time to eat. Kat shishit, let's say. Okay, they're already getting ready to leave. This time he catches them before they leave, right? Always he's insulting them once they've already gone, almost like trying to threaten the next group. At this point, he's really beyond, he doesn't know what to do. He says, halalu ba'alei me'era. These are cursed people. Why are they cursed? Well, he says, you're not getting anything. You're not getting the drasha because you're leaving the Beit Midrash. And you're also not getting to eat because you're leaving so late, you must have no food in your house. And you're like the worst of the worst. At least they have food to eat. You probably have no food to eat, and that's why you left now. So he curses them. Now, here goes the next part. Natane nav b'talmidim. At this point, he starts to look at his students, and what does he realize? He sees their faces change, right? They're petrified. Like, what about us? What's he going to say about us? You could see this is not the kind of teacher whose class you really want to be in. Certainly not whose class you want to leave early from. So Amar lahem banai, lo lachem ani omer. Don't worry. I'm not talking about you. Ela lahalalu sheyatzu. I'm talking about the ones who left. Because sheminichim chayei olam v'oskim b'chayei sha'ah. What did they do? They left chayei olam, things that will give them long life or life in the world to come, which is learning Torah. And they're dealing with chayei sha'ah, eating, that's mundane. The goof, right? It's the body. It's not important at all, right? They're leaving spiritual matters and dealing with material matters. When they left, he says to them, now this is the strange line. So he says to them, which is interesting, that he does end at a certain point, even though it said he was doresh kol hayom. Right. I was thinking my daughters went somewhere the other day and they said the shiur was like an hour and a half long and it was just too long. And they also were leaving in the middle. It was just a very long shiur. And I was thinking, people have to learn not to speak for so long. It's just painful for people to sit and listen to a lecture for that long. But anyway, Bishat Ptiratan Amar Lahem, Lechu Echlu Mashmanim, Ushtu Mamtakim, V'shuchu Manot Le'en Nachon Lo, Ki Kadosh Hayom L'Adonenu, V'al Te'atzvu Ki Chadat Hashem Hi Ma'uschem. He quotes them this pasuk in Nehemiah, which I mentioned the other day. I actually said it was in Ezra. It's in Nehemiah. And so correcting myself. And he said, it says there, go out and eat, right? It was Rosh Hashanah, then go out and eat and drink sweet drinks and send manot. This is where the manot comes in, sounds like mishloach manot. Send gifts le'en nachon lo, to the people who don't have. Ki tahadosh hayom la'adonenu, because today is a sanctified day. Ki chadvat Hashem hi ma'uschem. The happiness of God is your strength. We'll talk about that pasuk in a little bit. So it's interesting. First, he was all about don't do anything material, but then he did say in the end, well, go home and eat. So now we're going to see Amar Mar. Now we're going to go into this a little more. First of all, what is this? What do you mean he says to them, don't go eat on Yantif? Simcha Yom Tov mitzvah. It's a mitzvah to do Simcha Yom Tov, to have food and drink on Yantif. We all know that. We all grew up with that. That's why we eat these big meals. What are you talking about? Rabbi Eliezer l'tamei Amar Simcha Yom Tov reshut. He holds that Simcha Yom Tov is only optional. And therefore, if you can learn Torah, better to do that. Ditanya, how do we know this? A person on Yantiv should either eat or drink or sit and learn. Those are, and again, extremes, right? Either do only that or do only that. Rabbi Yoshua Omer, Chalkeu chetzio lashem bechetzio lachem. Rabbi Yoshua says, no, it should be 50-50. Okay, half for you, half to God. So first of all, before we move on, I want to talk about this a little bit. There's actually an article in Hebrew on the site, on Hadron's site, by Tanya Regav on the Hebrew side of the site about this. If your Hebrew's good and you want to read it, a little bit about this concept of chetzio lachem, chetzio lashem, to go more in depth into it. It's a very famous machloket. Rabbi Eliezer, there's two ways to understand him. Either he thinks that there's no Simchat Yom Tov. You don't have to do Simchat Yom Tov. So better, right? If you're a person who can learn, learn. Don't eat. Eating is, for people who need that, who want that. Okay, you can do it. But, there's an ideal to being Chetzio Lashem, and then it can override Simchat Yom Tov entirely. Some people say that what he means is that's your kiyum of Simchat Yom Tov. Simchat Yom Tov for some people is learning, right? You love learning. You can learn all day, and that you can be Makayim Simchat Yom Tov through learning. It's like a bit of a radical idea, but it's an idea. So it's a possible way of understanding. Within Rabbi Yoshua, there's two different ways of reading it also. Does he mean seriously 50-50, half-half? Or does he mean some sort of combination of the two? In other words, again, he's more the Beit Hillel, the more harmony. Right? Rabbi Eliezer is almost like you're either one or the other, right? It's almost like, and that's why he said they were going home, they were fulfilling it, which is okay. But it's really an issue, like he said, that it's either or. It's 100% this or 100% that. Like you're either that kind of person or that kind of person, and do it all the way. Right? How this works in with fasting and Yantif, there's a whole question asked about this. Maybe it just means don't feast a lot, eat something, that you should not eat at all. But, you shouldn't spend your time on meals like, we do, sit around for 3-4 hour meals. That's not valuable, according to him. Okay. Although he does say you could do kulol Hashem, but he clearly kulol lachem. He clearly was disparaging, though, to people who choose that. Okay, so now we're going to go on. Where did they get this from? Amar Rabbi Yochanan, shnehem mikra achad darshu. They both learned it from the same pasuk. Katuv echad omer atzeret lashem lokecha. V'katuv echad omer atzeret tiyeh lachem. One says atzeret, the holiday is for Hashem, and the other one says atzeret is for you. So haketzad, Rabbi Eliezer savar o kulol Hashem, o kulol lachem. Right? Each pasuk is giving the two possibilities. Rabbi Yoshua savar chalkeu, right? Merge the two psukim. Chetzio Hashem v'chetzio lachem. My le'ein nachonlo. What is this idea of give to people who don't have? Amar Rav Chisda lemisha lo iniach eruv tavshilin. Who wouldn't have food? Someone who didn't do an eruv, they're stuck without food. Give them food. So Amar Ikeda Amre. Some people say, well, it's misha lo hayalo laniach eruv tavshilin. It's only someone who couldn't have done their eruv and therefore doesn't have one. But if you had the opportunity and you didn't, then you're a posher. What is someone who can't possibly do an eruv? So Rashi gives an example of someone who's busy, he found a lost item, and he's busy all day, Erev Yantiv, trying to find someone. He tries to find a mitzvah that would take you all day long. He's trying to find the person who lost the item. So he spends his entire day, and then he misses out the opportunity to do his eruv tafshil. That's the kind of person you should give food to. But don't give food to a person who didn't do it on purpose. That's like another whole interesting attitude, right? If someone purposely didn't do it, right, you're going to help them, right? Well, maybe you should, but this says, no, don't help them. What does that mean? Amar B'Yochanan Mishum Rabbi Elazar bar Shimon Amar Lahem Hakadosh Baruch Hu LiYisrael Benu Levu B'nai Levu Alai B'Kitshu Kedushat Hayom V'Ha'aminu Bi V'Ani Poreah. Lend money from me, borrow money from me, borrow on my account to spend money on Kedushat Hayom. In other words, that's Chedvat Hashem Himo Uschem. The happiness of God is your strength. If you spend your money on Yantif food, God will pay you back. Okay, and this is going to lead us into tomorrow's daf, which starts off right away with Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur. So it's perfect. So just a sneak preview about spending money on food for Shabbos and Yantif. But before we get there, you'll have to wait to hear the next stuff. But because Rabbi Yochanan made this statement in the name of Rabbi Elazar, the son of Rabbi Shimon, that's the son of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, he's now going to make another statement, which is disconnected. Amar Rabbi Yochanan Mishum Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar Rabbi Shimon. If you want your stuff to not get stolen, your property, Yitabehen Eder. It's a type of tree put this tree. This tree is the kind of tree that people talk about all the time. Oh, the famous tree of so-and-so. So people will talk about it, and then your stuff your land won't get stolen, because if you go abroad, let's say leave your land, someone else comes and lives there, and then everyone will know that's your property because they know it by your tree. Shene'amar adir b'maram Hashem. Inam, because how do we know this? Because adir b'maram Hashem, right? God is strong in the heavens, but it means adir is b'maram Hashem. In other words, use the adir. The adir is the strong tree that will keep it in your property. Inami adra kishmei kedamre inshe my adra d'kaime l'dare dare. Maybe adra milashon dorot. It will keep with you for generations. Okay. Tanya Namihachi, last line for today, and we'll end with an interesting point in Rashi that I want to connect to Yom Kippur. Sadeh sheyesh ba'eder eina nigzelet, so that proves our point. If you have an eder tree in it, it won't get stolen. Ve'eina nichmeset, and it won't get nichmeset, which is that if you steal, right, you forcibly force them to sell it to you, that won't happen. O perotea nishmarim, and its fruits will be protected. Okay, that's another thing the eder tree does for you. How so? Rashi says perotea nishmarim, 3 lines from the bottom. Lo yadana maihi. Rashi says, I don't actually know why that is. Okay, so it's a great line in Rashi. It teaches you, right, lesson for the year. It's good to say, I don't know something, right? It shows even Rashi, who knew kind of everything, right? We always think Rashi, right? His commentary is so all-encompassing, didn't ignore anything, right? He says, I don't know what it is. But what's more interesting is then he goes on for 3 lines to explain what it is. So what's interesting about it is, right, he says, I don't really know what it is, but lack of knowledge never prevents me from trying to learn more. And that's basically what I wanted to end you with, this nice idea about, you might say, I don't know, but some people say, you ask someone the question, I don't know, and that it ends flat with that. But sometimes, well, think about it, right? And Rashi thought about it, looked around, found some possible explanations, and I'll leave it to you to look in Rashi to see what his explanations are about why the fruits are protected. I wanted to more show the idea that Rashi was willing to admit that he didn't know something, but yet was also, didn't end there and pushed himself further to try to figure it out. Nice idea for Yom Kippur, and I wish everyone a Gemar Chatima Tova, and we'll meet up after, and the Shiur for Yom Kippur will be up in the next hour. Have a great fast, meaningful one, and we'll meet up on whatever day is after Yom Kippur. Bye.